This is identity engineering, the science and art of reprogramming who you believe yourself to be. And in this show, we'll explore how identity shapes every decision, every emotion, every result, and how you can consciously rewrite it. Because you are not who you think you are, you're who you decide to become.
Welcome back to Identity Engineering. I'm Keith Leonard, and today we're going to talk about why change so often feels like an uphill climb, and why it doesn't have to. If you've ever tried to change something in your life, maybe it was your habits or your mindset, your body, your career, and found yourself right back where you started, you're probably asking that familiar, frustrating question: why can't I just stick with it? Most people think the answer is willpower. They think that they're missing discipline, motivation, or some special gene that makes other people more consistent. But here's what I've seen after decades of coaching and studying human behavior. Change doesn't fail because people are weak. It fails because they're building it on the wrong level. That's the hidden architecture most people never learn to see. The structure underneath every pattern of success, every pattern of failure, and every pattern of struggle. Every thought that you think, every emotion you feel, every decision you make are all being shaped by a deeper layer of your internal system. And if you're trying to change something on the surface without addressing the layer underneath, you can work as hard as you want, and that structure will just snap back into place. Think about this like renovating a house. If there's a crack in the wall, you could paint over it, and for a while it'll look fine. But if the foundation beneath the wall is off, that crack will reappear. Same place, same pattern, because the problem was never the paint. Most people spend their lives painting over cracks instead of leveling the foundation. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is the actual architecture of change. This is a framework that shows you very clearly where your change is being built and why it's either thriving or collapsing. This is a model I first learned through the work of two brilliant thinkers, Gregory Bateson and Robert Dilts. They were both fascinated by how human beings organize experience, how we learn, how we adapt, how we evolve. And what they discovered was that all change happens across 6 levels, each one influencing the next. Those levels are environment, behavior, capability, belief, identity, and purpose. Each one of them sits on top of the one before, sort of like floors in a building. And here's where things get interesting. Most people try to change their life by rearranging the furniture on the first or second floor. They change what's around them, or what they do. But the real transformation, the kind of change that lasts, happens when you start building from the top down. When you change who you believe you are, your beliefs shift automatically, your capabilities expand, your behaviors transform, and your environment reorganizes itself around that new version of you. That's why identity work is so powerful and why Identity 2.0 was born. We don't need to add more strategies. We just need to learn how to build our lives from the right floor up. So in this episode, we're going to unpack each of those 6 levels in a way that's simple, practical, and alive. We're going to look at real examples of how you can be changed not by pushing harder, but by shifting who you're becoming. And at the end of today's session, I'll give you a short diagnostic, a very quick way to identify which level you've been trying to change from and where you actually need to start. Because once you know where you're building from, everything changes. You stop feeling like you're failing, and you start realizing you were just working from the wrong floor. Allow me to break this down for you so it's easy to understand. If you're listening someplace quiet, you might even close your eyes for a moment and imagine this with me. I want you to picture a tall building, 6 stories high. Each floor represents a different level of human change. At the very top is purpose. Just below that is identity. Then beliefs and values, then capabilities, then behavior, and finally at the bottom we have environment. Now imagine standing on that bottom floor in the lobby. This is where most people try to change. They rearrange their environment, the people around them, their routines, their schedules, their external circumstances. You might switch jobs, move to a different city, end a relationship, start a new one. And for a while, it feels different. There's fresh air, new scenery, a clean slate. But here's what happens. If the identity running the system hasn't changed, you end up recreating the same results in a new setting. Same story, new wallpaper. Because environment alone cannot shift the system. This is the easiest level to modify, but it's also the least powerful. Now, go one floor up. This second level is behavior. This is the level where you try to change what you do. You decide, I'll start waking up earlier. I'll go to the gym. I'll stop procrastinating. And maybe you do for a week or a month. But without a deeper shift, those new actions sit on top of an old identity that doesn't believe in them yet. And eventually that old pattern reclaims its territory. That's when people say things like, I always fall back, or I guess I'm just not that consistent. But it isn't true. You're not inconsistent. Your identity is just calibrated to the old version of you. Now let's go up one more floor. Capabilities. This is where you build skills, strategies, knowledge, emotional tools. When you take a class, or study communication, or learn leadership, practice a new habit, that's a capability level change. This is more powerful than behavior because it expands what you can do. But again, it's not the deepest layer. And if your beliefs or identity don't support the use of those new skills, they stay locked in storage. They're available, but they're not being used. How many of you have read a life-changing book or attended a powerful training only to find yourself living the exact same way afterwards? It isn't because the tools don't work. It's because the identity running them doesn't support them. Now let's go one more floor. Beliefs and values. This is where the real architecture starts to take shape. Beliefs are the rules of your inner world. They're the meanings that you've assigned to what's possible, what's good, what's bad, what's safe, and what's dangerous. And your values are the emotional GPS that tells you what matters most. So if you believe, I'm not good with money, you'll unconsciously behave in ways that prove it true. And if you value comfort more than you value growth, you'll avoid the discomfort that growth requires. Beliefs and values are powerful. They act as the internal code that shapes every thought, every decision, and every emotion. But even they are not the deepest layer. Because beliefs are born out of something deeper, your identity. Identity is the fifth level. This is the level that answers the question, who am I? This is where you find statements that begin with the words, I am. I am a leader. I am not good under pressure. I am creative. I am broken. I am resilient. Whatever comes after the phrase, I am, is what your nervous system organizes your entire life around. Identity is the organizing principle. It's the lens through which you interpret reality, and it decides which beliefs you'll adopt, which skills you'll use, and which behaviors feel natural to you. If your identity says, I'm a runner, you don't have to motivate yourself to run, it's who you are. But if your identity says, I'm not athletic, every attempt to work out feels like you're swimming upstream. When people talk about self-sabotage, they're really describing an identity mismatch. Their goals are on one floor, but they're living on another. And then finally, we reach the sixth level, which is purpose. Purpose answers the question, for what or for whom? This is the layer beyond the personal self. It's the sense of meaning that connects you to something larger. Now, purpose gives direction to your identity. So think of it this way. If your identity is the compass, purpose is true north. Now, when your identity and purpose are aligned, motivation becomes effortless because your energy isn't coming from obligation, it's coming from a sense of meaning. Purpose-driven people don't need to push themselves because they're pulled by something more important. So when you think about these levels, environment, behavior, capability, belief, identity, purpose, just notice how each one influences the one below it. Change flows downward. Identity affects belief. Belief affects capability. Capability affects behavior. And behavior shapes your environment. That's why trying to change your life from the bottom up is so exhausting. You're constantly fighting against your own architecture. But when you work from the top down, when you align your identity and purpose first, everything else begins to reorganize itself naturally. Now, in a moment, we'll talk about why most self-help programs stop at the lower levels and how that keeps people cycling through endless strategies without ever reaching any sort of meaningful transformation. But for right now, I want you to just take a mental snapshot of that 6-story building. Because once you learn to see your life through those 6 levels, you'll never look at change the same way again.
If you're enjoying this episode, take a moment to follow the show and share it with someone who's ready for their next chapter. You can also join our identity engineering community. You'll find the link in the show notes. Come be part of this movement because identity doesn't change in isolation. It evolves through connection.
When you really understand those 6 levels that we just walked through, something clicks. You start to see why so much self-help feels inspiring in the moment, but fades once you're back to your normal life. And it's not that the advice is bad, it's that most of it is built on the wrong floor. Most personal development focuses on behavior, the 2nd level. It gives you habits to adopt, actions to take, checklists to follow. You get step-by-step systems, morning routines, vision boards, accountability groups, all good tools. But they all operate at the level of doing. And doing by itself doesn't rewire being. You could force yourself to act like a confident person, but if your identity still whispers, "You're not enough," that action will always feel like a performance. You can set goals, you can hustle, you can repeat affirmations, but if the belief underneath is, "People like me don't succeed," you'll unconsciously find a way to make that belief come true. Now, your mind isn't working against you out of cruelty. It's out of loyalty. It's loyal to your old identity. It's sort of like an operating system running old software. You keep trying to install the new version, but the base code refuses to support it, so it crashes. And when it crashes, you don't just lose progress, you lose confidence. And you start to think, well, maybe I just don't have what it takes. But that's not true. The truth is you've been trying to change your life from the surface. You've been painting the walls instead of repairing the foundation. Now, we've all done this. We've all bought a planner, we've taken a course, we've written affirmations on sticky notes, and for a while, it works. You feel motivated, you feel organized, you feel clear. But then something happens. You get tired, you get stressed, you get disappointed, and the whole system reverts back to your old identity. Why? Because stress always reveals your default identity. When you're calm, you can act like your highest self. But when pressure hits, you don't fall to the level of your training, you fall to the level of your identity. That's why you can't behavior your way into transformation, because behavior without belief is not sustainable, and belief without identity is unstable. Now, here's what I mean. Let's say somebody wants to stop procrastinating, and they read a book that tells them, set timers, block out distractions, reward yourself for finishing tasks. And they try it, and for a few days they're productive. But then the old self creeps back in. That identity that secretly believes, I work best under pressure, or I'm not disciplined. That belief fires a signal to the brain that says, we're out of alignment. And so the behavior collapses. Not because the system didn't work, but because the self-image didn't support it. Or imagine somebody trying to lose weight. They sign up for a fitness challenge, they track calories, they hire a trainer. They change their environment and their behavior, maybe even their capabilities, But if deep down they still see themselves as someone who always struggles with food or someone that never sticks with it, the brain will eventually find a way to match the outcome to the identity. Identity always wins. So when I say that most self-help operates too shallowly, I don't mean that it's useless. I mean that it's incomplete. It's building beautiful structures on unstable soil. And true change doesn't come from what you do, it comes from who you become. And so when you shift identity, you don't have to fight for discipline anymore. Discipline becomes a side effect of alignment. Think about this. If you identify as a writer, you write. If you identify as a healthy person, you don't force yourself to eat well, you just do. When you identify as a confident speaker, you don't talk yourself into speaking, you express yourself naturally. That's why identity-based change feels peaceful, not pressured. It doesn't require effort, it just requires embodiment. So, the next time you feel frustrated that you're not making progress fast enough, take a breath, because you're not lazy, you're just working from the wrong level. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because now instead of trying to fix yourself, you can re-engineer the blueprint. You can start asking yourself, what level of this problem am I working on? And even better, what level do I need to be working from? That's the turning point. That's the moment you move from chasing habits to building identities. And once you cross that line, change becomes inevitable. Let's bring this into the real world for a moment. Every year, millions of people around the world do the same thing. They make New Year's resolutions. I'm going to get into shape. I'm going to stop procrastinating. I'm going to save more money. I'm finally going to take care of myself. And for a few weeks, they actually do. The gyms fill up. Diet plans spike. Journals sell out. Everyone's filled up with that fresh start energy. And then something happens. Somewhere towards the end of January, that motivation fades. Those same people who are all in are suddenly saying, I'll start again next week. And by February or March, most of those resolutions have completely disappeared. Now, it isn't because they're lazy, and it isn't because they didn't want it badly enough. It's simply because they tried to change their life from the wrong level. Let's walk through how that happens. So let's start at level 1, at the environment level. This is where most New Year's resolutions start, at the surface level. You buy new workout clothes, you join a gym, you stock the fridge with healthy food, you change your environment, hoping it will change you. And for a while it works. New space, new energy, new start. But if you don't change the system running inside of you, that new environment eventually becomes invisible again. Your mind normalizes it and you go right back to the patterns you had before, just in a prettier setting. It's like moving into a new house, but bringing all the same clutter with you. It feels fresh for a while, until it doesn't. The next layer is behavior. You start taking action. You go to the gym. You follow the diet. You track your calories. You're checking off the boxes. You're doing all the right things. But at this level, change is fueled by motivation and willpower. Both are temporary. Look, some people have more willpower than others, but nobody has an unlimited supply. So when stress hits, when life gets busy, the brain reverts back to whatever's easiest. And what's easiest is what's familiar. So you skip one workout, then two. You miss a day of journaling. You grab some takeout instead of cooking, and before you know it, the old routine has reclaimed its pace. Because the behavior has changed, but the identity didn't. You were trying to act like a healthy person instead of becoming a healthy person. Now let's move up a level. Some people push a bit deeper. They start learning how to change. They read about nutrition, about time management, about financial planning. They're building skills, which is the level of capability. And that's great. But even knowledge has a ceiling if it's built on old beliefs. If you believe, I'm not the kind of person who sticks with things, then no amount of skill will overcome that identity. You'll self-sabotage, not consciously, but systematically. because your mind always seeks consistency with who you believe you are. You can learn everything about how to manage money, but if you still believe I'm bad with money, your actions will prove yourself right. You can take every fitness course on the planet, but if your internal dialogue says, I've never been athletic, your behavior will eventually match that belief. That's not failure. That's just the architecture of how change works. Now, go up one level, we're starting to get closer to the source. This is the level where things start to shift for good, because this is where your brain holds meanings that you've attached to things. This is the level of beliefs and values. You might believe eating healthy is a chore, or working out is painful. And if those beliefs don't change, you'll resist the very habits you're trying to build. But the moment you start redefining your meanings, for example, moving my body is how I show gratitude for being alive, or managing my money is a form of self-respect, the entire experience changes. Behavior becomes easier when it aligns with belief. But even that isn't the deepest level, because beneath all of this is that one question, who am I? This is the level of identity, and this is where everything changes. If your New Year's resolution is built from an identity perspective, it sticks. Not because you're forcing it, because it feels natural. Think about it this way. If you identify as someone who's trying to work out, your brain is going to see exercise as an interruption, as something that you have to do. But if you identify as a healthy person, your brain sees exercise as maintenance, something that you get to do. When your actions become a reflection of who you are, instead of what you're forcing yourself to do, you stop negotiating with yourself. There's no internal debate. It's just, of course I do this. This is what people like me do. That's the difference between effort and embodiment. Identity doesn't run on motivation. It runs on alignment. And then finally, at the very top is purpose. This is where everything flows. When your New Year's resolution connects to something bigger than yourself, it doesn't feel like discipline. It feels like devotion. So, for example, if your purpose is to live long enough to walk your daughter down the aisle, or your purpose is to show your children what strength looks like, or your purpose is to make art that inspires people, that purpose fuels everything beneath it. Purpose gives context to identity. Identity gives power to belief, and belief gives shape to behavior. That's why two people can set the same New Year's resolution, follow the same plan, and get completely different results. One is trying to push from the bottom up, the other is pulling from the top down. So this year, or any year, when you think about the changes you want to make, don't start with, what do I want to do? Start with, who am I becoming? Because goals that are built from identity are sustainable. They don't require endless motivation. They just require alignment. And when you live from alignment, consistency stops being a struggle. It becomes your natural state. Now, before we wrap up today, I want to give you a simple way to use everything that we've talked about. Something that you can do right now in real time to figure out where your change is being built. Because the moment you see this, everything else starts to make sense. So wherever you are right now, if you're walking, sitting, driving, just take a moment to think about one area of your life where you've been trying to make a change. Something that you've wanted to shift for a while now. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's your business or your finances. Or maybe it's your confidence, your relationships. It doesn't matter what it is. Just pick one that's been on your mind lately. And I'm going to ask you a few questions. And I want you to notice, as I speak, which ones feel most true for you. That'll tell you which level you've been trying to change from. So first, ask yourself, have I been focusing mainly on what's around me? Have you been trying to change by switching jobs, moving homes, ending or starting relationships? buying new tools, gadgets, journals, hoping that a different setting will make it easier to change? If so, you're working at the level of environment. And while environment can influence you, it can't transform you. This is the most visible layer, but it's also the most temporary. Next question. Have I been focusing mostly on what I do? Are you trying to change through habits, routines, willpower, checklists? Are you forcing yourself to act differently, hoping that that action will eventually reshape who you are? If that's where most of your attention goes, you're working at the level of behavior. And this is a useful starting point, but without deeper alignment, this is exhausting to maintain. Or maybe you've been focusing on learning, new skills, new information. Maybe you've taken a course, maybe you've read a book, maybe you've built a plan. But something inside still resists following through. That means you're working at the level of capability. And you're upgrading your software, but not the operating system underneath. Now, ask yourself this. What do I believe about this area of my life? Do you have beliefs that say, I always struggle with this, or this just isn't who I am? Or do you have values like, I want to change, but I also want comfort, and comfort usually wins? See, if your beliefs and values are in conflict with your goal, it's like trying to drive where you've got one foot on the gas and one on the brake. You could have all the right behaviors, but your beliefs will steer you back to what feels true. Now, let's go deeper. Ask yourself, when I think about this goal, who do I believe myself to be? Do you see yourself as the kind of person who succeeds at this, or the kind of person who struggles with it? Identity answers the question, who am I in relation to this goal? And whatever your answer is, your mind and body will work to make it true. This is where the real work begins, because identity is your command center. If you change this, everything below it reorganizes itself automatically. And then finally, ask yourself, what is this change for? Not just for me, but for what greater reason? For my family? For my mission? For my contribution? How does this change connect me to something bigger than myself? When you find that answer, your purpose, you tap into the most powerful source of energy there is. Not motivation, it's meaning. Meaning doesn't run out. So think about that area you chose. Which of those levels felt most familiar to you? Where have you been building from? And more importantly, where do you need to build next? Once you start working from the top down, from identity and purpose, instead of behavior and environment, everything changes. Your goals will stop feeling like effort, and they'll start feeling like a natural expression of who you are. And those habits that used to feel hard and difficult become natural, because they're no longer in conflict with who you are. They're in harmony with it. That's the essence of the architecture of change. We don't have to add more effort. We just have to build from the right level. And when you do that, you're no longer fixing cracks in the wall. You're rebuilding the foundation itself. Now, in the next episode, we'll explore how identity actually forms, the blueprint beneath the blueprint, and why so much of what you think was never consciously chosen. We'll talk about how beliefs get installed, how early experiences become identity code, and how you can write that code intentionally. But for now, I want you to remember, change doesn't fail because you're weak. It fails because it was built on the wrong level. Build from the top down, and your life will rise to meet you. I'm Keith Leonard, and this is Identity Engineering. I'll see you in the next episode.
That's it for today's episode of Identity Engineering. If you found value here, please rate the show and leave a quick review. It helps more people discover this work. You can also learn more about identity engineering by visiting theidshift.com. And remember, The person you want to become isn't waiting for someday. They're waiting for you to begin.